World of Warcraft is a game I struggle to make videos on. It has a very specific audience, and for anyone outside of that demographic, the title seems almost unapproachable, which always makes me wary when considering whether or not I should make a video on it. But throughout World of Warcraft's 14-year run, Blizzard has done countless amazing things to breathe life into their MMO behemoth, and I think other games, MMO or otherwise, could learn a lot from some of their game design choices. More specifically, I'd like to explain what I think is one of the greatest endgame mechanics ever designed, and why I think other game developers should try to adapt and implement it into their own games. And that mechanic is Mythic Plus. Okay, why make a video on this and potentially alienate a portion of my audience? Firstly, it's my channel, so I'm going to talk about what I want. And I mean, if Razbuten can make a video about a musical, I can make one about WoW. And secondly, I think this is an idea a lot of games, specifically those with dungeons, can incorporate in some way. And lastly, I haven't been able to get it out of my mind, and I need to get it out there somehow. So what is Mythic Plus? Well, it's a means to create an ongoing sense of endgame progression for World of Warcraft players, through a ramping challenge of runs in the top level dungeons, using a strict timer, an increase in enemy and boss difficulty, and different mutators that rotate on a weekly basis called affixes. These affixes can be anything from more random enemies in a dungeon, to enemies having death throws where they can deal chunks of damage upon dying, meaning you have to be smart about how quickly you kill things. This is something that Blizzard have been building up for years now, so here is a quick rundown of where things stand. There are 4 tiers of difficulty with dungeons in World of Warcraft: Normal, Heroic, Mythic, and Mythic Plus. For the most part, Normal is mainly for leveling and questing, giving players a sense of what to expect with pretty trivial mechanics to help ease the newcomers in. Heroic is unlocked at max level and adds a slight difficulty curve, making sure people have to actually take note of mechanics or else risk dying. Generally, Heroic is used to get better gear to progress into the harder content. Mythic adds on average 1 more mechanic per boss, and instead of being a pushover, regular enemies, or trash as they're more commonly known, pose an actual threat. If you and your team of 5 aren't careful in your preparations or don't understand your individual role and class abilities, things can go very bad very quickly. This finally brings us to Mythic Plus, which is a theoretically infinite progressing level of difficulty. With each level up starting at 2, damage percentages and health pools are increased, as well as the previously mentioned affixes, with new ones being added at levels 2, 4, 7, and 10. Each new tier of Mythic Plus will also result in higher level gear for players. When finishing your first Mythic dungeon, you will get a keystone. This key will be a Mythic Plus 2 to a random dungeon, and if you complete it in the allocated time, you will be rewarded with a plus 3 to another dungeon, and so on and so forth. Since dungeons have been tightly designed, it's a matter of mastering layouts and optimizing your path through before climbing up the difficulty ranks. Mythic Plus isn't a new mechanic, however. It was introduced to World of Warcraft in the previous expansion Legion back in 2016, and before that, it was part of an update in Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls with the Greater Rifts. But the idea here feels like it's starting to reach its true potential. With just a little tweak of making Mythic Plus seasonal, it really adds to the nature of wanting to come back over the course of the most recent expansion. There is a lot more to the idea than this, as is the nature of World of Warcraft. But to save the boring nitty-gritty, that is the basic gist of how the idea works. Mythic Plus taps into that primal idea of outdoing not only ourselves, but everyone else, pushing you and a team of 4 others to the limit of your skills to get the final hit on the boss just before the timer runs out. Is incredibly satisfying. Knowing you can do it, and being rewarded with an even harder challenge afterwards, puts you right back into the, okay, we can do this mindset. And if you do it really quickly, you can even skip a few levels because no one has time for content they're too good for. Even failure has its place. You still get loot at the end no matter what, so no one's time is entirely wasted, but your key just goes down a level. It's the game's way of saying, it's okay, you're not quite ready yet, go back and try again. I mean, there are always outside factors like recruiting a random player who has no idea what they're doing and mess up the entire thing for everyone, but that's the nature of online gaming. Beyond 10 plus, the stats of gear gained isn't increased, so it's all for the glory of the leaderboard and the bragging rights to say that you did it, which in and of itself is a very powerful motivator. People love to be the best at something they're good at, so why not have an endless challenge for those who want to perfect? But why should Blizzard alone hold the reins to this idea? It's so simplistic in its idea that many dungeon and loot focused games could in practice utilize it to great effect. and by extension, elongate any game well past its completion date. Scoreboards alone are something that push players to perfect their skills. It's an idea that's existed since the dawn of gaming, and this is the perfect excuse to bring it back into the spotlight and out of the shadows of a few niche titles that still hold onto it. The Savage Labyrinth in Wind Waker and its subsequent follow-ups in Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild are the perfect place for this idea. The completion of these multi-tiered mini-dungeons is in and of itself a satisfying thing to do. Overcoming dozens of floors worth of enemies in an arduous gauntlet to test players of their competitive skill is a great idea. Once it's done, there is no real reason to go back. Imagine then that completing it once gave you the option to go back and do it again, but harder and on a strict time limit, going up and slight adjusted difficulty each time. And now with online leaderboards, you could see who has the highest level and the fastest timer. I know Zelda isn't the grinding gear-based dungeon crawler kind of game like Diablo or World of Warcraft, but people like a challenge even if the reward is the experience itself. There doesn't always have to be a tangible gain, just knowing you can overcome something is worthy of its own attempts. Battle Chasers Night War plays with this idea a little bit in the context of a turn-based JRPG style game. When you reach a new dungeon, you get to pick the difficulty you want and it rewards you accordingly. Battle Chasers randomizes its dungeon layout slightly, so it relies more heavily on understanding how the combat works and how to efficiently navigate multiple enemy types to get through fights. Among the 3 tiers, normal, heroic, and legendary, only the first 2 are available from the outset, letting you choose what's comfortable for your current party makeup. But upon completion of either difficulty, the third option is unlocked. So why not then, after finishing a run on Legendary, could a Legendary Plus option become available, employing the same ideas as World of Warcraft, with scaling loot, harder enemies, different mutators, and leaderboards to boot. To stop overgrinding for gear, maybe it could also be an endgame unlock, to test all that players have come to learn over the course of their journey, giving those that quite don't want their time with the game to end, something to sink their teeth into. 2018's God of War soft reboot could have need for a system to extend its gameplay in an interesting way. By the time you've reached the end of Kratos' journey, you're stuck with a lot of badass gear that doesn't really serve a purpose. You can continue after the fact to keep collecting, but it doesn't really serve to much end. And hitting New Game Plus just means you have to wade your way through the slow story beats again, which is great the first time, but on second playthrough can be tiresome and daunting to just think about. So, why not give another option to take on those fun dungeon challenges with augments to their formula? It doesn't necessarily have to be timers, mutators, and increased health pools, but just an option to put that shiny endgame gear to fun use. Maybe remix them in the style of Ocarina of Time's Master Quest version. Far Cry's Outpost Master is incredibly close to being this idea. Upon completing the liberation of the area you're in as the one-person army you become, outposts can be reset for faster kill times and bigger point counts through combo strings. But to get the most out of your experience with this idea, self-imposed restrictions are put in place to amp up your own challenges. Now I love self-imposed restrictions in games. Running Nuzlocke and Pokemon for one is always a great time and can be a true test of one's ability and stamina of a game. But I am also lazy by nature. So if one thing goes wrong in my own run, I can cheat it with no consequences aside from my own crippling guilt. Having systems in place to actually restrict and challenge you plays into people's idea of extended fun once a game has been completed, and a good way to master your way through mechanics. Hell, even look at something like Dark Souls YouTube videos. That is an entire genre of its own with naked runs, no level up challenges, and the like. If people were given the option to do harder developer implemented gauntlets on their favorite areas on a whim without trudging through slowly paced story, the idea of endgame as we know it would be much different. A lot of this does sound like New Game Plus, but it's different in its own respects. Instead of starting fresh in a world with your existing gear, you take on specific challenges over and over again. Like I said before, one falling of New Game Plus was trudging through the dreaded dull parts of a game to get to the good bits. With this idea, you can do the content you desire over and over again without all those boring bits. I'm also aware adding extra content for the few dedicated hardcore players is probably much more needed work. But with games as a service becoming more and more common these days, why not add them as DLC? While not the most elegant solution, it serves as a much better means to shove microtransactions into games instead of, say, experience boosts. But let's look back at Mythic Plus and World of Warcraft for a second. With the latest expansion, Battle for Azeroth, the reason I think it hit its peak is that idea of seasons I briefly touched on before. The 10th level mutator is going to change each major patch. So when new content comes out, there will be an affix that reflects the current story or big boss to fight, giving a reason for those who mastered the dungeons this current season a reason to keep coming back again and again. so it's set to keep the idea of extended endgame content even more fresh every few months. If other games were to implement a similar idea, seasonal rewards such as outfits, weapon skins, etc. on a rotation would justify the ongoing cost to buy in. I don't think every game could have a version of Mythic Plus. Some games end at clever logical points and they are worth a lot in their own right. But when applicable, reworking how we think about endgame and longevity of a game is important and can serve a much better end than just hitting reset, only keeping your level and items on hand. Most other MMOs on the market could have their lifespan severely increased by having actively engaging things to do at endgame. Daily quests and that just aren't keeping people around anymore, when there are always better things to be doing elsewhere. As it stands in WoW, it's not a perfect idea. It easily has some flaws that need to be ironed out, although they are mainly issues indicative of the game as a whole. But as a concept for redesigning endgame, I would love to see other franchises take it on and incorporate some neat challenges to their core systems and dungeons to keep them alive. Because at the end of the day, if I love a game, I want any reason possible to keep going back as much as I can. Sorry it's been like 2 months since I last uploaded, but you know, life and stuff. After couch surfing for that entire time, I finally got myself a room and I plan to release more videos more often now that I'm back in the swing of things. If you want to see what I'm up to, follow me on Twitter. If you want to come hang out, check out my Discord, or if you want to support the channel, drop a like or even maybe subscribe. I cannot say thanks enough to my lovely patrons. You all keep me motivated to do what I do even when times get tough. And I want to give a special shout out to my top tier supporters: Nicholas Gambarini, Amacy, GC Positive, Maddie Ireland, Eugenia Wu, Uncool Greg, Mark B. Writing, Zach Rainville, Stuart Sharp, Nico Blakely, Writing on Games, and Jack Mells.